So far we said that the new economy advocates were disappointed when, at the height of the dot-com boom, wages rose so rapidly that they eroded profit margins, more than offset any gain in productivity, and led to the shrinkage of profit margins, profits, and eventually the stock market's collapse. Fine. So the question then arises, well, what about this new economy? And if there's a new economy, what happened to the old economy? What is that dichotomy about? Well, first of all, we're obviously still in the new economy. The personal computer hasn't gone away. Obviously, improvements are being made all the time. We're all aware of wireless. We're all aware of smaller and smaller mobile devices that are encroaching upon the realm of the computer, something that used to take up a desktop and now is no bigger than a handset telephone. So all those improvements are continuing, so there's no doubt that we're getting gains in productivity. But that still doesn't answer the question is what was going on with the old economy? Why was the new economy such a radical transformation? In order to understand that, what we need to do is we need to go back and consider earlier decades. And in order to get a good grasp on that, please take a look at chart 3.3, as I am doing now. I'm looking at a chart labeled capacity utilization. And capacity utilization is a simple concept. If we envision industrial production is the output of manufacturing, mining, and public utilities. And we ask ourselves this question: what is the current level of output expressed as a percentage of the maximum? So, for instance, if maximum output is 100 tons of stuff a day, and we're producing 80 tons of stuff a day, then we're operating at 80% of capacity. Simple enough. So, therefore, when we look at our chart, we can see that the line typically has fluctuated between the high 80s and about 70 since we've been keeping this statistic in the late 1960s. But we also notice something else. We also notice that the fluctuations used to be much broader. That once upon a time, capacity utilization surging above 85% was common, and as well as the deep dips associated with recession. That's the old economy. Just as the new economy was led by technology, the old economy was led by consumer purchases. And by that we mean that households would borrow, they'd spend on homes and cars, and then, after the signal from consumers, then industry would go out, build more auto plants, build more sawmills, and so you'd have investment following on the heels of consumer activity. That was the old economy. And let's take a look, at the 1970s for an example. Take a look in 1972-3 how capacity utilization surged. In those years when capacity utilization surged and we had industry operating flat out, using almost all its capacity in order to produce goods, what that meant was that typically productivity fell, because when industry was trying to produce as much as possible, it had little time to inspect, maintain, repair the equipment. That led to breakdowns. And breakdowns meant a drop in productivity. There was less output per hour. And if you can imagine fewer tons of steel being produced per hour, you can imagine that it takes more hours to produce a ton of steel. Just like if we have If we step down on the gas and we have fewer miles per gallon, then it's going to take more gallons to go a mile. So if we get less output per hour, it'll take more hours to produce a unit of output. And so every time the economy surged ahead, led by the consumer, then we'd have a drop in productivity. And the drop in output per hour meant it took more hours to produce a unit of output, and that, of course, meant rising costs. That was the old economy. So every boom carried the seeds of its own demise in the form of declining productivity and rising costs, because we pushed the economy too far, just the way you can push your engine too far and generate rising costs of transport if you push the accelerator to the floor. So the new economy advocates in the 1990s said that's all passé. We found a new way. This time, the 1990s boom is not being led by the consumer, not being led by autos, not being led by residential construction. It's being led by technology. And business is adding more hardware, more software, more capacity to produce, more high-tech capacity to produce. And this high-tech capacity to produce is driving productivity northward, and the consequence of that is more output per hour, and more output per hour means falling costs. Falling costs means rising profit margins, and that's going to be translated ultimately into higher profits and higher stock market values. Now, as a matter of fact, if you take a look at chart 3.3, you can see, sure enough, as I'm running my cursor over it, you can see in chart 3.3 that we, as a matter of fact, do have no great surge in capacity utilization in the late 1990s. So industry was adding so much high-tech capacity that capacity utilization was held down. That meant productivity could surge ahead. The problem, of course, was, as we said earlier, that did not take into account the rising wages of full employment, which eventually brought the whole thing down in the stock market bust of the year 2000. And the dot-com bust of the year 2000. But that doesn't mean to say that there was no new economy or that we're not living in the new economy today. It just meant that the new economy had not led to rising stock market values forever.